welcome to the second episode of Dialogue Options. I'm talking today with Meredith Placko, host of Marvel Movie News on the Popcorn Talk Network and a contributor for Geek.com. Meredith, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Liana.
All right, for people who aren't really familiar with your nerd history, how young were you when you got into comic books and video games and sundry other things?
So I don't want to be that person, but I was literally born into this life. The nerd life chose me. My father and mother work in computers. My mom's a systems programmer. My dad, before he passed, did a lot with security, and he helped develop the LAN and WAN infrastructure in South Florida with IBM. So it was kind of one of those things that, here, welcome to the world. Here's nerdy things. So my father gave me my first comic book. I was 8 years old. It was the very first issue of the Wolverine series, and also Uncanny X-Men 244, Jubilee's first appearance. And my mom played a lot of video games like King's Quest, and probably things a young child shouldn't be playing, like Wolfenstein. So
may or may not have played Leisure Suit Larry too young here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I walked in on my dad playing that, and he's like, no, honey, you have to leave.
When we played Leisure Suit Larry, they had those age check questions.
Yeah.
So we'd run into the next room and go, Mom, what's the name of the Beatles song from this album? And she'd tell us, and we'd go in and put it in. And
oh, that's amazing.
And they finally went, why do you want to know this? Just because. Turn off the monitor, turn off the monitor. And I mean, there's something so innocent about that I don't think there's a modern equivalent to now. I mean, in the 90s, it was pushing that camera to see Lara Croft's boobs, and now
it's all out there.
I guess it's that lollipop chainsaw skirt peak that you get an achievement for. That's probably the modern equivalent.
Yeah. But even then, I think kids these days, their parents are, a little bit older than us, and we probably would look blindly to those things because we did them ourselves.
I think it's different if you have that background as opposed to you don't, because we're not going to turn out into slavering serial killers. Exactly. We're fine. I might like cats a little too much, but other than that, I turned out okay, and I did I remember the original Mortal Kombat in arcades.
Oh
and
my God.
Now you look back at it, this game that was going to warp minds. It looks like jam is coming out people's necks. They look like jam Pez dispensers in retrospect. Well, now that we've established our nerd cred.
Because that's important. We have to do that.
Yeah, it's funny. My husband just yesterday was saying, because we were talking about this whole nerd checking thing, and he was saying it's different. Guys test each other to show superior knowledge, whereas women sort of get tested to have knowledge at all. Would you agree with that statement?
I would completely agree. And in fact, I find most of my nerd checking coming from other women, a little bit in men if they skew on the 40 plus side. But most of it, it's kind of like, it's almost that alpha male, but in an alpha female superiority that we have to kind of pee on the ground to mark our territory.
Yeah, there has been some competitiveness, increased competitiveness. I've noticed as more women come into gaming. And I guess because you grew up with it, you're in the same boat I am. It's normal for you. You don't feel like a newcomer. So how do you respond to that?
I will say every case is different, because there are times that I can be very eloquent and not let it bother me, but I'm human and things rub me the wrong way. And there are times that I totally will pull well, so-and-so and back in my day card. And I do get a little competitive sometimes, because it just depends on how that person is going to interact with me. But most of the time I just try to shrug it off and be like, what, whatever. Obviously, if they're feeling this need to be competitive, they're the one with the problem. I'm already here doing my thing. It's just really frustrating, because it's like, we say so much that as women in this industry and just fandom, we need to stick together. We should uplift each other. And, it shouldn't be competitive. But the reality is, especially if we're working on it on the entertainment side or a dev side, it is competitive. It's a finite number of jobs with a near infinite number of people coming to it. And it's really coming to that place where you can recognize with yourself what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and how to harness those things and make yourself a better candidate, not because you're better than the other person, but because you believe so much in what you're putting out into the world.
the response we've been getting, and the reason I started doing this series, is sort of bringing that passion back to the equation, because I've found now that nerd stuff, for lack of a better term, has hit the mainstream, there's definitely been a shift to me in terms of it's gone from sort of that community thing to that competitive thing. And one of the things is obviously the Big Bang Theory, and I know you have some strong opinions about that, so I'm going to let you have the floor on this one.
Well, I mean, I wanted to like that show because my mom likes that show. And I think that's the thing, is Big Bang Theory isn't made for me, it's made for my mom. And I kind of feel like, shows like that drive that trope, that idea that nerds are this like stuffy, weird, forensic, almost mean, catty side of things, that I'm like, hey, we're not like that anymore. We're cool. Like, legitimately, we are like the cool people. Look at the Marvel and DC movie sales. Look at all the merchandise in the store. It's, we've essentially become the cheerleaders and the popular kids, and that in itself is actually a huge problem. Because once it gets to be that level of competitiveness, we start putting other people down to get up on top. And I feel like the Big Bang Theory, in not all their episodes, but in some of their episodes, kind of reinforces that stereotype, and that just upsets me.
Yeah, it's funny because my mom really likes the Big Bang Theory too, and maybe it's the show for moms of nerds. Yeah. I don't know what it is, but yeah, my mom loves that show, and I'm like, you sort of, I don't argue with her, but it is sort of, I wonder, is that how you see me, Mom?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, Amy Farrah Fowler is a great character, but the thing with her and Sheldon has gotten so old that it's, to me, it's an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. And this idea that this incredibly smart woman would take that crap from a guy because they're numerically or scientifically matched is bizarre to me. And it's with the number of people that approve these scripts, it's puzzling to me. And I'm not saying they should change it. They make the show they want to make, right? It's just odd to me that of all the things they could have done with somebody with obviously the sitcom talents of Mayim Bialik, they decided to go there.
Yeah, well, and I think that just speaks of Hollywood in a broader term, that we still have, like, while they're capitalizing on nerds are cool, it's still taking a bit for younger, more open-minded people to be writing and producing these things. I mean, we've got a lot of young blood in Hollywood right now who come from a different generation, who are a lot more open to things. And I mean, we're seeing those changes. And, and the reality is we're not going to see any sort of change in a social movement or media overnight. It's going to take time. And I think, the next show that's going to be like whatever the Big Bang Theory successor is going to be, will take the strengths and improve upon the weaknesses of that show, or so I hope.
Well, it's going to be the production team too, right? Because it's Chuck Lorre. All his shows are that formula. Take mean banter, add shtick, new show, money. Like that. Formula. That's his formula. But I mean, it's elsewhere as well. We saw it with that whole Jimmy Kimmel YouTube gaming thing. I mean, I kind of thought these are writers who understand these phenomena writing for a host that doesn't. That was what I got from that. And the end product was so lame. I mean, coming from a comedy background, I was like, Kimmel's a funny guy. And the people who work on his show are exceptionally talented. And so I wonder, is it almost a fear of geeks in Hollywood that they don't want to sort of identify as, I'm geek and I'm proud? They have to sort of sacrifice themselves on the altar of normies.
I think there's a lot to be said about that, because looking at the general audience, especially these late night shows, they're not us. It's still our parents and skewing a little bit younger. They're not speaking to our generation, so they're still writing to a market and a demographic that's funny to them. Like, ask most other people who aren't in our little growing world. They probably thought that Jimmy Kimmel bit was hilarious. My stepdad did. So I think it's still an issue, is that you have to know your market and know who you're writing for. And then again, as our demo changes, as we start tuning into those shows more often, the writers will start writing more towards us and not the other side of the demo.
Yeah, because Stephen Colbert, who obviously has a younger audience, has done some amazing things on World of Warcraft and various games, and he hasn't done the poke the nerds thing. It's been a one of us thing, and to me that was almost breaking of his character to go, no, World of Warcraft's cool. And I mean, I really respect him for that, because I thought it's not just a thing of this validates me. I thought it actually led to a funnier piece. And I think at the end of the day, do you think, because this is what I think, let's see if you agree, people aren't responding to the fact that, oh, they're picking on nerds, so much as we'd be down with it if it was actually funny.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing that in comedy it's changing, that there, it kind of goes back and forth, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where, sometimes it's really cool to be the negative, sarcastic, put people down to put myself up and make other people laugh. But I feel that sort of comedy really isn't hitting home right now, because we come from a bunch of people who, honestly, a lot of us have insecurities, we're hyper aware of them. So instead of tearing those things down, we're going to embrace them. And I love Colbert and even Stewart to that degree, because they really hit the mark with that, and they really know how to speak to their audience, and they speak to our generation, and they're like, hey, we get it too, and we're going to they put their little subtleties out there that we know, and it's cool. And it's like, in a perfect world, you don't want to tear people down, you want to build everyone up, and you can find humor in that as much as you can with anything else. Like, take that, oh god, I don't even know, Nicole Auber, is that her name, the fat shaming girl video?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, that's how I haven't even addressed that yet, because it's so outside of my realm, but that just kind of illustrates, like, why sit there and make fun of other people for comedy's sake, or, when you could find a different way to make jokes that aren't at the expense of other people.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously an advocate for geek culture. Why is it important to you?
Well, I mean, it's obviously I'm not one of those geeks who I want to like hoard everything and live in my own little world and keep it just for me. I want to be able to live in a world where I can walk down the street and wear a Miss Marvel tank top, and people are like, yo, that's awesome, I love your tank top, or like, I love Miss Marvel, or even like something just like a generic X-Men, and people don't look at me weird, and they embrace it, and they like high five me and think it's cool, because I just think the more people who love the stuff I love, the better life I'm going to have, because I'll have, more friends, I'll have more opportunities. And I think understanding geek culture as a growing part of just popular culture, that's what it is now. It's not even, you can't even say geek culture is not mainstream pop culture now. It makes the world more accepting for me, because it's interesting. So growing up nerdy, I obviously had that phase in my life where I was picked on and, excluded and didn't have a whole lot of friends, and I lived on the internet. But high school, that kind of changed for me. We had a radio program that was broadcast throughout Miami-Dade, Palm Beach County. I was on air. I was super nerdy. I spun punk rock and industrial music, and I had a rap show. A tiny little white girl doing rap music. I mean, hey, we all have our things. But I also was really big into my nerd stuff. And this is in the mid to late 90s. I was in high school, and people started to be like, oh, I like that. Oh, I read comics when I was younger. Wow, you still read them? And I started developing this collection of popular kids from my high school that accepted me for me and got them back into nerdy stuff. And it kind of is what shaped me for today, is that I feel like if everyone can enjoy what I enjoy and not see it as like, oh, wow, you're a 34-year-old woman who reads comics, what's wrong with you? It's just going to be better. And I think it's going to be more accepting. And I think it speaks to that broader world of where we have, issues with, people dealing with their sexuality or sexism, and comics is like a weird correlation to that it's like, oh, you can accept your nerdiness. Now maybe we can accept other actual real world issues that people deal with.
Yeah. I found, because I had similar experiences, I went to a high school that was very multicultural. I just found that the people who weren't, white, for a lack of a better term, or that, buzzword privilege, they didn't give a crap if you were into, they had bigger issues, and they were like, that's cool. I find a lot of the hip hop community up here and the punk scene drops geek stuff into their music. I mean, the looks, the out there looks are inspired by superheroes in a lot of way, with the steel shields, and there's a band called an act called Swollen Members, and Madchild drops comic book references into his rhymes all the time. So I could definitely relate to that, which kind of brings up the stuff that's going on in Marvel right now, and this is your wheelhouse. Is there, it's a very controversial thing where they're changing existing characters to up their diversity quotient. Do you have an especially strong opinion on this phenomenon?
So it's interesting. I actually go both ways in certain cases. In all reality, I don't see that you should just outright change a character skin, race, gender identity just to do it for the sake of doing it. Most cases it shouldn't matter. Though, I'm actually going to take a DC example here because I think it speaks a little bit more. If you were to just suddenly make Superman not white, would his story work the same because he grew up as a good old boy in middle America? Could you tell the same Superman story, understanding that race is not just the color of your skin, but a background of where you grew up? You would have to change Superman's entire mythos. Is that a bad thing to update this classic character to speak to a broader audience? I don't think so. But I think if you just arbitrarily recolor someone without a reason, I think that's actually more diminishing whatever that culture is experienced. So that's why I think creating new characters like Kamala Khan, who is a Muslim, our new Miss Marvel, is absolutely fantastic. They're, going back and kind of rewriting Bobby Drake, Iceman, as gay in one of the alternate type universes, though he's becoming more mainstream. That was a good way of handling it, because now you have our 6'6" Iceman is like, wait, I'm not gay. And then this other one that's supposed to be his younger self is gay. It's actually creating an interesting, discussion within the comics. But I think the key is that you can't just do it to satisfy a market. You have to give reason, and you have to honor that culture, because I can only speak so much because I'm a white girl. I'm a very privileged white girl. I don't know what it's like to grow up poor. I don't know what it's like to grow up, not given opportunities because of the color of my skin. But I like to think that I'm culturally aware enough that I wouldn't just want someone to be change, like their color to be changed just for the sake of talking to a demographic. And that's why I advocate is that, we need more minorities, we need more people of color, we need more women writing, inking, arting these things that, I'm not saying that a 40-year-old white man can't tell a great story about a woman. That has happened. I've seen it. There are people who are just great storytellers. You don't need to have that background to tell a story. But if you really, really want to hit those notes, start bringing in those people to tell these stories, because they're going to tell a different story that maybe that 40-year-old white guy can't really understand outside of translating what someone told him.
Yeah, George Perez's Wonder Woman and Gail Simone's Wonder Woman were radically different. Both great runs. I wish Gail had more time.
Yeah.
But radically, radically different. One, George admits it was his wife and, his sister, and he was borrowing experiences, whereas Gail has that inherent understanding as an observer of people, but also being a woman that I think other DC writers, top DC writers don't have. It's interesting for me, though, because I'm a Jon Stewart Green Lantern fan.
Yes.
It's really confusing. Not Jon Stewart from The Daily Show, the Green Lantern. And so I've got the Alex Ross. You can see some Alex Ross stuff in the back, but I've got the original 7-piece, and then I have the modern Justice League characters, and there's a generation gap. People of a certain age walk in and go, hey, that's Hal Jordan, who's the black guy, and kids come in and go, well, that's Jon Stewart, who's the white guy with Green Lantern. But then when they made the Green Lantern movie, it was Hal Jordan. And that's my, bless you to whoever sneezed.
That was my boyfriend.
Bless you, boyfriend. But he sneezed on the truth. That, I think, is my concern. So what do you think comics can do? Because obviously a lot more people see them in the theatrical and television versions. What can they do about that legacy character issue that they seem to default to the first character, who's usually a white guy, when you do that translation?
Well, I think Marvel's doing kind of what DC did, and they're just throwing it all away and starting from scratch. And so to go on the cinematic route real quick, and I hopefully this will lead into this question, is that, you know, when translating from page to screen, you can make those changes. Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury did not detract away from old white man Nick Fury. That was a great casting role where color did not matter. It was just the great actor for that. And Marvel has done that in many of their films where they've cast the right actor for that job, not based on certain physical attributes. And I think that's fantastic. Now, in terms of the comic world, you know, what Marvel's doing right now is they're doing their new Secret Wars. God Doom runs Battle World after basically all the universes have been destroyed. You have the last 616 in the Ultimate Universe. They clash together, and now you have all these different versions of these iconic characters running around. And then come October, Marvel's going to sift through the ashes, and we're going to see a whole new lineup. And from this is where we can take those iconic characters, those legacy characters, and reinvent them for a younger audience. Well, you know, it is going to piss off. I'm going to be honest, it's going to piss off the old readers. It might even piss off someone like me, but in order to attract this new generation, to keep comics as a viable medium, because let's be honest, 10 years ago, I wasn't even sure if I'd be able to have a comic shop anymore.
They were constantly predicting doom.
Yeah. And you have to change it up to meet this newer generation. But you can, and I think that's why I will say having multiple universes is a good thing in comics, because you can still write those legacy characters the way that they're known to be, but then you can have the side characters in your Earth 2 or your Ultimate, and they could speak to a newer audience. And I think it's, you know, it'll be interesting to see what Marvel does. But, you know, as we say in comics, no one's dead forever. So I don't expect this to last more than a year.
That's a big pet peeve for me, because I don't know why they bother killing characters anymore. They killed them to bring them back. I mean, when Jason Todd came back again, I'm like, that's it. Don't bother killing characters, because they're always going to come back. I mean, when they offed Martian Manhunter a few years ago, he wasn't dead an issue before they were already talking about him coming back. Yeah. And do you think it's hit the point of insensitivity, especially with, you know, the real stuff going on in so many people's lives? The dead people actually don't come back. Do you think that it's hit an element of tone deafness that isn't resonating with people now?
You know, that's a really interesting observation I haven't thought about, and I think you're really onto something there, because we don't, you know, when a character dies in comics, I don't feel anything anymore. Yeah. I don't care how good the writing is. I just don't, because I'm like, oh, they'll be back. You know, like they killed Wolverine off last year, and I'm like, that's fine. Old Man Logan's coming back. Like it might not, again, and it might not be the same Wolverine that we know, but how many of them are really the same? Because depending on who's writing them, they change. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right that there is, you know, as a reader, from a reader's side, I don't really care about these big events and these big deaths anymore, because they have no impact, especially when you have a major world-changing event every year. Every year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really easy to get overloaded. I think readers, like longtime readers like me, old fogies, are getting overloaded. Yeah. And I'm at the point now where it's like, I'll settle down and I'll wait until, because the status quo always reasserts. And that's the really frustrating thing. I mean, Wolverine, as you mentioned, to me, has become such a schizophrenic character in the comics because multiple people take cracks at him. I think that's why the movies are so strong with that particular character, because even though we've had director changes and different writers, Hugh Jackman has kept that continuity, but that's not going to last forever. No. So how do you sort of handle that changing of the guard where all of a sudden it's the character, but it's not my version of the character?
I think what we need to go back to in terms of comic book storytelling is arcs. You know, back in our day, we had 6 or 7 issue arcs that would combine into a great trade paperback. It would tell a succinct story, and while a team might continue on, you know, you might have that change of guard, and you could go forth knowing that while the characters might be written a little bit different, at least that one story was told, and you could just be happy with that. And I feel like I feel like we've just gotten out of hand. I think, you know, Marvel's too busy thinking about what's going to happen 4 years from now in their comics versus right now. And I think we need to get back to that essential storytelling and focus on these characters and not what event they're going to be playing into.
Well, even the movies have sort of been infected by that. By everybody else is hanging out at a farmhouse in the Avengers 2, and here's Thor in this pool with the Vision for something that a comic book fan knows what's happening there, but the regular audience was like, that's cool, the Vision's cool, but WTF just happened.
So I of all the Marvel movies, Avengers 2 is one of my least favorite. I thought it was from the terrible CG from the beginning of the movie that made me feel like I was in a video game, to just like, we don't need to have these many characters. And I'm like, come on, Joss, you write ensembles. That's what you do. Like that was definitely a case where Marvel executives were putting too much in there, I feel. But I think we need to, like, I love these Easter eggs. I love seeing them, but we don't need to force them in there. Yeah. I think we need to make sure that superhero film bubble doesn't burst. Let's not jump the shark. Let's pull back into, again, writing really good stories. I know we're coming up on phase 3 and we're all excited about Infinity War. It's still like 4 years away. So, and that's why, like, I'm really excited for Civil War. I think, I love the Russo brothers. I think they're really good at telling stories, and I'm really excited that they'll be taking over Infinity War, because I think they're going to, I think they have the vision, and I think because it's 2 versus the team, they can stand up and say, no, we want this. And I think they're willing to fight a little bit more to get what they want.
They're going to have to adapt Civil War radically from the comics, just because it was so... there were character studies, and I mean, my favorite part of Civil War was the Punisher, which yes. I never thought the Punisher would be my favorite part, but that moment where he's sitting in that bunker and going, you are all stupid ideologues.
And that's something I'm actually really hoping for Daredevil, the second season, because they're bringing Punisher in, and it's going to come out around the time of Civil War. I hope we get some crossover into that Netflix series like they pull in with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I really hope that we'll get to see some of those stories told that we won't see on the big screen, but an avenue like Netflix opens up for a wider breadth of storytelling. And I really am hoping we get that. Because I know we're not going to get our X-Men element, so I got to hope for something.
Yeah. What have been your favorite Marvel movies?
Well, so Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier comic is one of my favorite comics. I thought what they did adaptation-wise for film was fantastic. It's not the same story, but that's okay. It's a fantastic,
like half of it.
Exactly, but it's still a great story. Like, I'm not one of those people that needs to see stuff from page directly on screen. If I wanted that, I'd go read the comic. I want a good story with these characters I love. I love that. I might be the only person in the world who really enjoyed Iron Man 3 because it was silly and fun. It felt like Lucky Number 11, and I have a love for those weird heist films, and that's why, like, it felt like that for me. And then, outside of Marvel, I have to say Fox has been there. I'm starting to trust Fox a little bit. I really like Days of Future Past. It was fun. I think Apocalypse is going to be really good. Deadpool, though, is going to be my pick for next year. I think Deadpool is going to be the one movie that kind of, wow, okay, that's a real comic book movie. Like, for those fans who want comics to film, Deadpool is going to be the one that does it.
I'm hoping Deadpool is anything like Ant-Man. I'll be happy, because I really enjoyed that Ant-Man didn't take itself seriously.
Yes. Yeah. I think Ant-Man was so different. It was so refreshing after Avengers, too.
Well, just that slide into dark. I mean, the grim dark of Batman. I'm personally tired of it. I know people love it, but that mass destruction, again, I'm like, yikes. I'd like to get away from that and actually see good people doing good things win. Yeah. And Ant-Man was such a glorious little story about a guy who wants to see his daughter, and then stuff happens and the acting was great in it, and you got sort of that, Marvel diversity without it seeming crammed in. I mean, his team was so Edgar Wright. Yeah.
No, it was great. And that's, again, on the diversity topic, that's a great way of doing it. You put it in there, and you don't make it a huge issue. You just put it out there. I mean, I give me stories about what it's like to be underprivileged and fighting for a spot in your world in X-Men. That's what that's about. For things like Avengers, I just need a good story being told. I don't need agendas, so to say. Except for in Civil War, I do want some government agendas, because that's what it should be. Let's be honest.
Yeah, well, that's almost, Civil War, for people who don't know, is all about sort of order versus freedom. It's, the Assassin's Creed paradigm.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be a very touchy movie for America now, personally, because of, the culture war that everyone finds himself embroiled in.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be their film where they can really touch on a lot of these subjects without, like, again, you can touch on a subject in a film that's about superheroes without making it an agenda, if that makes sense. Like, let's address it, let's make a notice of it, let's bring it to light, but let's not force it in there, because at the end of the day, these are just Hollywood blockbusters. So I don't know, but that's just, I don't know, it's my weird unpopular opinions, like I've shared with people. So
you found this is an unpopular opinion?
Yeah, I found with some people that they feel like I need to promote more diversity and more talk about race relations or sexism in these films, and I'm like, but that's not what these films are for. If I want to go talk about, or watch a film about transgendered issues, I'm going to go watch The Danish Girl, which is with Eddie Redmayne, that's coming out, because that is a film about that. Or if I want a film that's going to go deep into like more political commentary, I have a wealth of films out there that I can watch, but sometimes I just want a fun movie. I don't want everything to be a breakdown about what it's like to be privileged or not, or being a woman. Like, I'm all for more Black Widow representation. I'm also for, give me more Captain Marvel and give me other females in these movies. But sometimes I just want to enjoy a movie, and I feel being a female journalist / opinionator, because that's apparently what I've been doing more as opinions in journalism, that if I don't fall on a certain line of things, I get criticized and hated on for it. And it's like, sometimes I just want to talk about the stuff I love,
That's a big hot button issue now, that the idea that you're female, so that's supposed to matter in everything you do, even though, then we're also getting this pressure of, you're a journalist, you're supposed to be objective. And you went to school for journalism, so this has got to frustrate you because it's clashing with everything you learn in class. And I think people don't understand this. So do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, actually, it kind of ties into something today. So a little bit more background about me. So I did go to school. I have a degree in journalism. I've also worked in the news industry for 15 years. I started in radio, then I worked at local affiliates, and I was with NBC Network News for 5 years as a producer. So this is the only world I know, and everything from school to news directors to editors have told me, cite 2 sources, give an unbiased opinion. You might watch something like The O'Reilly Show or Rachel Maddow, but those programs after 8 p.m. are not news programs. They are classified as entertainment, but I get it, they're on a news channel, so people might think that's what I do.
Well, it's infotainment.
It is, exactly. It's infotainment. And that's, and now moving into the pop culture reporting, freelance stuff, blogging, really, I'm expected to do more of that, and it's something I personally am struggling with because I'm going against 15 years of what I'm supposed to do. But so even the other day on Facebook, I rant a lot on my personal Facebook. I made a commentary. There was a comic book news site that did a report that at a convention in Houston this past weekend, 2 comic book artists almost came to blows on stage and had a fight over, their differing of opinions and how one of them made fun of the other's wife. I moderated that panel. That was not the case. It was 2 old, longtime, surly dudes taking jabs at each other as they do, having a fun time.
Right. And
so I wrote a commentary about how you shouldn't trust everything you read on the internet, and that, sorry, comic blogs aren't news sites. They don't hold to the same ethics and standards that we are legally bound to in the outside digital journalism realm. And I spoke at length about how we need to actually put these practices in place as these new media journalists. And someone this morning commented, was like, well, I agree with 60% of what you said here.
Specifically 60%.
Yes, specifically 60%. But that's okay. Don't feel bad. And I'm like, how do you not agree that we need 100% across the board better practices as journal? And he hasn't responded. And I'm really curious. I'm like, maybe I'm missing what he's trying to say. But I'm like, the honest truth is that this new media age, and we're feeling it in the traditional newsroom as well, because while clickbait sites are growing in popularity. Most people get their news from a biased source now because, generally speaking, as people, especially if you happen to have a strong religious or government-aligned belief, you're going to want to have news that caters to your beliefs and just reinforces what you say. So now with the digital world, we're able to pick and choose what we want to hear. And that could be outright lies. And I feel in terms of pop culture journalism, in which really your only opinion should be, did I like this or not? We're getting a lot of bias in it, and we're getting a lot of misinformation, a lot of poor reporting, and a lot of people that you don't have to have a school background. You don't even have to have to work in a newsroom. You just have to have an understanding of what's right and wrong, and follow the old always cite two sources from any story, and just if you're writing a news piece, come at it without a bias. I write about things that I love and hate all the time. I had to do a story on someone that I personally had an issue with, but I still reported on what she did because it was a good story piece. I took my bias out of it.
That's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, it is tricky, but if you can do it.
Yeah.
And so it just frustrates me to no end, working in this digital realm of having to deal with people who can't seem to do basic things and having to honestly write to people who want to make a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah, well, it's also rewarding the lunatic fringe. It's reasonable discussion. I mean, that's part of the reason we started this series, is we wanted to have good conversations like this without the fireworks that are required in chat shows or the things that are going to make an article go viral. I mean, it's shocking to me that we're seeing articles like, headline and then deal with it or too bad. It just, I have a visceral reaction to it. I'm sure you do, because it's like running up the down escalator. It's, anal sex without lube in journalistic terms. Like, no, that's going in the outdoors. Stop, ease up. And it's really upsetting people. And then the editors responsible for this content actually start yelling at people on Twitter saying, toughen up.
Yeah.
And this is against every shred of journalistic guidelines, ethics, but it's absolutely in keeping with what you have to do to make a lot of money and get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So how do you serve both masters? Because we all have to do it.
I'm really fortunate that the sites I'm writing for don't lean like that. I did work on a couple sites when I first started going freelance that were definitely clickbaity, and I just, luckily the pay was so shit, it was easy to walk away from.
They usually are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm learning I have to make my headlines sexy. I'm learning I got to make things sexy. But what I'm doing is I'm actually finding it's fun because I'm like, again, I can make it sexy without being trashy. I can make, a bandage. Here, something I wrote about today is scientists are working on a bandage that is with a polymer filament that actually sucks bacteria right out of it. So my headline could be new bandage that sucks bacteria right out of the wound, and that's sexy right there. So, people want to click on that. Or, even something as simple as like 11 rap artists that dropped comic book references in their rhymes. Like, things like that maybe you wouldn't see, well, you would see it on CNN now. Traditionally you wouldn't see it you wouldn't see that traditionally in a news headline, but you can still make things punchy. Mm-hmm. And that's what I try to do. I try to, one of the things I'm doing now that I'm out in LA is doing comedy stuff, because I'm finding comedy sells and people love funny. And so, taking improv classes and learning comedy writing from some friends that work on TV shows, it's helping me be a better writer, but still being truthful to my core beliefs.
Yeah, you have to be careful not to stretch facts for a joke. And then people don't understand jokes because we end up getting information twice removed from the original source. And it's amazing how things, I say, metastasize on the internet. That classic example of the guy who made that comment in a closed room about, women in STEM, you either fall in love with them or you make them cry. And that blew up into this massive thing based on one person's version of events.
So I have an issue with a lot of this, and I think being older, you might understand. there used to be a rule that what happened behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors.
But that's not the way it is anymore.
It's not. And I understand that, but it's like, to take a broader example, it was the Christian Bale when he yelled at that grip.
Yeah.
People got so angry at him, but we weren't there and we don't know. And I could, if I wanted to, I could write a book of horror stories of some of the famous journalists I work with, but I'm not going to, because we all have hard days. It's a very tough and demanding industry. There are things that, like, what we go through, no one will ever understand. And to go and betray that, like, there are real instances of sexism, aggression, actual, like, physical abuse that happens. And those should totally be exposed. But someone having a shitty day after 20 hours, stuck in a tornado driven place, and they get frustrated, that, like, just using a huge example like that sort of stuff, I don't know. It's very, very hard for me, because, again, I believe in equality. I'm one of those people that I don't like the word feminism. I use equalism, just because feminism has become something that I don't necessarily connect with. But I believe in equality. I want that. I've hit brick walls and glass ceilings in my industry before. I've definitely been paid less, and I've definitely missed opportunities because I'm a female, and I obviously fight very much to not have that happen. But there's sometimes those incidences that I'm like, that might not be what you're reporting it to be, and you might be blowing something out of proportion and completely ruining someone's life. And so, again, I think we need, it's so easy to attack. It's so easy to just jump on that bandwagon. But sometimes we do need to pull back, and we need to look at the real story here. And again, in the U.S. court, as well as it should be in journalism, you're innocent until proven guilty. And here in the court of the internet, you're guilty because we say so.
Yeah, there's no even chance for innocence. It's interesting that all the reasons you don't identify as a feminist are all the reasons I won't stop identifying as a feminist. So let's talk about that. What are the things you think that I call it pop culture feminism, because it's not based on anything rational. What is it doing wrong?
I mean, maybe it's just what I'm being exposed to, especially here in LA. I just, I have these feminist friends who are very outspoken, and it's like, it'll be something that they're like, I need feminism because a man complimented my hair color on the street. And I'm like, is that really, like, that's why you need, I need feminism because I got turned down for a promotion because my female boss told me I was too sexual and flirtatious, or like, that's why I need feminism, because it's actually impacting my day-to-day life. But the feminism I'm getting in specifically nerd culture isn't actual, like, glass ceiling stuff. It seems like, someone sent me a suggestive text, or like someone wrote me hi on Facebook, and I'm like, I've gotten dick pics, I've gotten really gross things, and, like, you know what I do? I don't bitch about it. I might, like, I have a personal group of friends that if it's something really funny, I'll be like, hey, look at this fucking idiot on the internet. But I don't like to exaggerate things, and I feel like there's this new pop culture feminism that it's very in vogue to be offended at any time a man talks to you. And so I guess that's why I've become afraid of feminism, because if I say I'm a feminist, and we're just going to put it out there, there's a whole slew of nerdy guys on the internet that are going to sit there and take a whole crap on me because I identify with something that shouldn't be a dirty word, but has become a dirty word.
I'm well aware of that phenomenon.
Yeah.
But it really is, the fact that, relational aggression between women, especially women in positions of power and women coming up through the ranks, that's a major issue. And it's a major issue in media. And that is something that is specific to women. And I mean, the whole issue for me with the whole I'm about equality is there's so many facets to equality. There's gender identity, there's race, it all comes down to class.
Yeah.
Is what it really comes down to, the various things that keep people lower class as opposed to having the potential for upward mobility. And I just wonder, how do we solve this, considering there is such polarization now, where there's people who, like you said, oh, this guy talked to me, sexism, whereas then there's this other side saying the wage gap doesn't exist, the glass ceiling doesn't exist, and it's even pulling apart in feminism. There are feminists defending the fact that in some careers, not all, but in some, women make significantly less than men. And then they bring up professional modeling, which is supposed to fix everything. I mean, the places where women make more money than men are things like professional modeling, porn, and other highly sexualized, stigmatized careers. And people don't realize that's not the same as being a lawyer, a doctor, a CEO, these so-called respectable jobs you can do well into your 60s.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
Well, okay, and first off, I totally realize I'm probably going to get a whole lot of hate because I'm diminishing other people's ideas of feminism and probably throwing trigger warnings out the window, and I apologize, but...
that's okay.
Yeah.
I am the evil red monster.
Oh,
so
good. Yeah.
That's okay. I will absorb it. That's what these are for. Absorption.
Yay. I'm part of the DFC committee, so I don't have a lot of absorption up top.
The DFC?
Delicious flat chest.
I've never heard that before. I like that.
It's my favorite.
DFC.
DFC. But yeah, in terms of I don't know. I really, and it's hard to say because obviously my problems are very different from people who are upset because someone says hi to them. We all have that different level of comfortability. And there's a certain level that, going into the realm of media from being production to on air, I have to own a bit of sexuality. I have to know that, hey, I'm a woman. If I style myself the right way, it's going to help me get a better job. And that's probably totally counter to everything I should believe in, but I'm going to play that game while I can because...
Men do that too.
They do,
They're
though.
just not called on it.
They really do. Yeah. I mean, it's like they build, they work out and they get the right haircut. That's something that's equal on both sides. But really, in terms of how do we do it? I mean, we just keep doing it. Like, I did a women in media panel this past weekend at Amazing Houston Comic Con, and it was great because it was funny. We're changing it to Quest for Equality because now we have gay men on the panel, and that's just, it's not just, he's like, I don't feel like I identify as a woman. I'm like, it's okay, we'll fix that. But I had TV personalities, producers, myself, which go the gamut, and a comic book artist on there. And we all kind of talked about our various struggles. And at the end, all of our struggles are essentially the same. The stories are different, but everyone hits those same roadblocks. And we were trying to figure out what we can do to break them. And I think, there's this generation, and I call it the Tumblr generation, where they want everything right now. Like they perceive every slight, and it could be from a TV show or movie 30 years ago, and they get upset about the inequality of something from 30 years ago. The honest truth is that you're not going to topple the Eastern Wall in a day in this sort of thing. It's going to take time, and it's going to take the old guard dying off and the new guard moving in. And so I think, the reality is I think we need to mitigate our expectations of what we can do, and we need to fight for change where it's going to matter most, because the problem is like the more you push against something, it's going to push back.
Yeah.
And I don't feel, and when you get to that point, no one's listening to each other. And so by going out there and saying, you need to change this and you're terrible and, I'm not going to support, that's the thing. If you don't support something, don't support it. Don't put money in it.
Right.
That's the biggest thing. If you don't want to support something, don't give them your dollars, because that's where it's going to be heard the most. Sometimes large internet campaigns, social media campaigns will equate change, and those should be used in the right circumstances, because there are times where that needs to happen. But I think we need to, again, going back, if we want to seek change in these industries, we need to go in there and make those changes ourselves. And it's a lot more work than just screaming about it on the internet.
Well, yeah, because screaming about it on the internet is still just screaming into a void. I mean, I think the face-to-face conversations are starting to, again, part of the reason I wanted to have these one-on-ones is I find that one-on-one discussions are far more, it's PvP versus RVR, to use the gamer term.
Yeah.
I mean, you're this tiny little thing, and the Horde is fighting the Alliance, and it's all this. It's exciting to watch week after week, but how much, obviously, like in gaming, some people have a greater contribution than others, but at the end, it's all about sort of individual, especially in a newsroom. To me, it's all just about sort of respecting and hearing individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's no substitute for that, and it really seems to me like, especially these larger media companies, are trying to find easy fixes so that they can hire people without social skills and still get team cohesion when you can't. You need managers that understand people. And unfortunately, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen people who were really great at a grassroots or mid-level job, and then they get promoted into management and they just don't have that skill set. But that's what you do. Somebody leaves and everybody goes up one rung. And somebody who's a great reporter is not necessarily a great editor.
Yeah, I will, that was the interesting thing about that boss I mentioned. I was like, I don't know why you're even threatened by me. I don't want your job. I am not a good manager. I will fully admit that, like, give me a small team of people and I can make magic happen. Let me be in charge of a whole department and I don't know what to do because I know how to focus on that one issue, that small thing. I'm not necessarily a big picture thinker. That's probably why I don't like these big crossover events with comic books also. And you're right. There are people, there's a reason why we have management and there's a reason why we have people who can speak for that broader audience. And I do think one-on-one interaction or a small group is going to, it takes away all that random noise. We don't have, people might comment to their eyes bleed in the YouTube thing, agreeing or disagreeing with what we're saying in this video, but because they can't interject, it's not taking away from this conversation. And I think, if people want to have that voice heard, they should do more writing. When you write, that's your words out there. You're putting it out there. And it might just be on Tumblr. It might be for a news site. It might be for a blog. Get that out there. So at least somebody, and even if it doesn't impact a country, if it impacts one person, then you've made that change. And
that's the journalist in you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about stories. It's about that one person's story. And I completely agree with you. I'm just finding now that you need a citation to be taken seriously. And that's not journalism. That's academia. And they're very different things. And the internet, it's the curse of the hyperlink. Because you can go, this study did this, or this person said this. I feel people are using it as a crutch in their blogging and not going out there and getting that deeply personal story, which is crazy because people are quoting, say, bell hooks up the wazoo without understanding what made bell hooks, which is she was telling her story from multiple perspectives, and the fact that she was a woman mattered, and the fact that she was black mattered, and all of that comes together in her experience. The fact that people are borrowing that to apply it in places I don't feel belongs. I mean, you can't extract one part of that experience from the whole. And I feel that's just one example, but a lot of people are doing that now. And I feel like it's a very heavy responsibility disseminating information, but you can't insulate from it.
No, and I think there's something too for a good piece, a good journalistic piece. You rely on both. You get those studies, you get those facts, but then you get those anecdotes. Because and this is something that I'm working towards being better. And my way I approach journalism is I want to take these really, and I don't care if it's like a medical study about T cells or the latest, Apple pen tech. I want to take that information, break it down so my mom can understand it.
Right.
And I think there's something to be said about, and in conversations about race, religion, sex, sexuality, take those lofty ideals, but break them down to their essence, and then talk about those little bits, and then put it all together at the end and see what you can create.
Yeah. And I mean, it's obviously always, it's like comic books. The story never ends. So all we're dealing with is a story this month. It's ongoing. These massive things like gender, It's crazy to me. You mentioned, stuff from 30 years ago. The messages we took from that media 30 years ago are nowhere near the same as the stuff I'm seeing spit at us now. It's retroactive analysis that wasn't the point. I mean, the reason people were so naked in the 80s was back then it's, I'm going to wear what I want and you keep your hands to yourself or I mace you. You know, I have pepper spray. You know, that was the whole thing. And pepper spray was stupid, but it's assault. But that was the whole thing back then, is women were saying, I'm going to wear a thong and I'm going to wear a low-cut shirt and I'm going to wear shoulder pads to make myself look bigger and screw you if you don't like it. And now it's, you know, I lived back then. I remember when Return of the Jedi came out and it was like, whoa, Carrie Fisher empowering, well, Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, empowering, saving herself from slavery, wrapping that chain around Jabba's neck and choking the son of a bitch. And now it would all be about that outfit and not what she did with it. Like, we have to start from this rarefied air. You're never allowed to start low and sort of like if Pygmalion or My Fair Lady was written today, she'd start as the proper lady and stay there. There's no story there. And I find that coming out of my mouth a lot. Do you find that a lot, that you're sitting here going, I have to make a story where journalistically my gut's telling me there really isn't one?
You know, I've a couple of times. You know, it's when, especially, so I used to really be into cosplay. That was kind of my shtick for a while. And I find I get called upon to write stories about cosplayers and sexuality a lot. And I feel like it's all, and you know, people are always asking about like, well, what was she wearing and how did that affect the story? And I'm kind of like, but wait, the actual story here is kind of like how people are treated. Like, let me actually just pull a real world example. Last Comic-Con, there was a very unfortunate incident where a girl was taken to the hospital. She was found beaten, bloody, and there was talk that she was wearing a revealing costume. And people, of course, you know, wanted to talk more about like, well, obviously she was dressed like that. But the real story is that she was underage and kind of doing things she shouldn't with someone that she shouldn't. And like, to me, the story there is like, let's talk about how convention culture kind of, I don't want to say encourages, but almost forgives a certain level of openness to underage drinking, drug use, and big diversity of men sleeping with younger women. To me, that was the story, and all the outlet wanted me to do was talk about like, well, no, she was wearing this, so she asked for it. And I'm like, well, that might be part of the story that she was dressed revealing. There's a bigger story here.
Yeah, I mean, we had that on the weekend. We were shooting cosplayers for my cosplay show and trying to figure out if these kids were old enough to sign a release form, you know, instead of their parents doing it. What are you supposed to do? Go, are you 18?
Yeah, you do.
Most of the time, we were really fortunate. Their parents were standing right there, watching them fill out the form. And so that was easy. But some of them, it was like, you can't ask because they're technically in an event where by entering the door, they've consented to be filmed. But I want every T crossed and I dotted, you know, and that becomes exceptionally difficult. And I personally think it's great that teenagers can experiment with their sexuality in a relatively safe space. Emphasis on safe.
Yeah.
The minute you start getting issues like that going on, then we start having issues, because then we can no longer go, it's safe. And that, I think, is a super serious issue. You're right. And the fact that it's being boiled down to what she was wearing, why are we having these slut walks in every city if we keep going back to this, if it's so embedded, you know?
No, it's true. And to me, like, that just speaks of a greater issue across our nation outside of pop culture, especially here in America, is that we really need to tackle, like, it's okay to understand your sexuality. We're so repressed in so many ways here. And that, you know, the fact that we even need to create safe places for kids to express their sexuality is foreign to me, because my mother was like, hey, we're going to have this talk at a young age. I know you're going to want to have sex. This is how you're safe about it. Just, you know, be safe. Look out for these issues of people who might take advantage of you. And it didn't, that being said, it didn't stop me from being raped by a classmate, but that sort of shit just kind of happens, you can't predict that. But it did help me understand who I was at a lot younger age, that I didn't have to go out and kind of put myself in bad situations to find who I was.
Did you also find that it was easier to understand it wasn't your fault?
Oh yeah, I didn't. That was one thing, is I live with a lot of guilt, but being raped at 16 was not one of those things I live with. So
yeah, I mean, this cover up, new false modesty thing, that's my big concern, is that it's actually leading to increased victim blaming, this idea of, women as reward, or the damsel in distress. The whole idea of the damsel in distress being problematic, to me, is the same thing as saying, what'd you do to deserve it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is every time we get upset in media, especially with video games, like, oh, I can't believe she'd wear that to battle. I'm like, so basically we're saying that she's either, one, being drawn just for the male gaze, or two, she's a slut for dressing like that. So where do we, but if I openly said, hey guys, I'm just going to walk around in a metal bikini, I own it. That's my right as a feminist and as a female, but then it's also patriarchy putting that on me. That's actually something I don't understand, because I have the same people arguing two very different sides of this argument. There's one side is saying that, oh, women are drawn, sexualized for the male gaze, and the other is like, oh, well, she's dressing sexy because she owns it. And then there's the third factor of like, she needs to cover up. And I'm like, I don't know.
It's funny you mentioned that, because that's precisely why I did a chainmail bikini photo shoot. I did two, actually, nice. And the bikini broke. In one, I learned, don't put unsoldered rings near any body heat. They stretch and then go plink, and it's just like guns coming out of a turret, like poof, right? Mm-hmm. Let's see, the emergency vehicles are calling based on this story. Yeah. Right. But yeah, you say gun anywhere near LA, an emergency vehicle. Yeah. But it was a really, to me, a fascinating experience, like a gonzo journalism experience. And those pictures are still around. They have not gone away. And it's amazing to me the different responses people have to it. Nerds, like people who have been in, and I use the word nerd as a positive, people who have been in it all their lives are the most accepting of it, because they grew up with heroes, the He-Man and She-Ra test. Like, yeah, She-Ra was wearing this cute little dress, but He-Man was only wearing furry shorts, so there was no imbalance, right? Whereas, people now, they want to pick those images apart, and they want to make it, well, the minute you do that, that's all you are. And I'm sitting here going, are you insane? That was for work, Yeah. I wanted to be able to understand the whole process of doing a men's magazine photo shoot. Mm-hmm. And we recorded it, and we did actually air the bikini breaking. Wow. We talked about it, because said, do you want to put black bars over it? I'm like, I think that's going to draw attention more to those 4 frames. Yeah. And it was part of the process, and I don't think we should be, it's a tit, for God's sakes. It's not a severed head. Little did I know how major that decision was. I was coming at it logically, instead of coming at it attempting to predict hysteria. And I think that's, unfortunately, we have to do that, as anybody who's doing any actual news gathering has to come at it nowadays from, you have to think about it logically and be a professional, but then you also have to almost attempt to predict what the outraged police are going to do with it. And you really can't. People pick on the most bizarre stuff. Mm-hmm. What's the strangest thing you've had picked apart?
Oh, man. Well, I get I get the, oh, your boobs aren't big enough.
Really?
That's one of my, because and I'm small, and like sometimes I cosplay sexy characters, and I mean, I sometimes do the 3 boob trick, but I literally will have people like, oh, you're too flat chested to cosplay that. And that's usually from the men's side. Generally speaking, women pick me apart the most. I get everything from like, oh, you're too sexy, or you're showing too much skin, or, I could be in a Dark Phoenix bodysuit, which shows like literally my face.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And people like will comment that like, oh, you're too sexy for this, or just, it's really weird. It's like I will say that I've been fortunate enough to not, and I've been out there for years, and I mean outside of like crap on 4chan, which I haven't read since 2007. I've been very fortunate that I don't get much outside of the nerd checking or who the hell does she think she is? She doesn't know what she's talking about. People have been I've been very fortunate that the people that I interact with on a more common basis don't tear me down as much. For me, it was more prevalent when I was more active in cosplay. The most I get now is like on comments, like I won't read comments on Marvel Movie News YouTube after the first day, because then is when they get super trolly.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's, it's the same shit. Like, oh, she doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about. She's just a girl. She doesn't read comics. Well, you know what? I know as much as I can, because guess what? I have to talk about all this shit 24/7. So yes, sometimes I have a surface level knowledge of something, but at least I'm talking about it. Be happy that a chick is talking about your things. But yeah, no, I've been unfortunate. I think that the only time I've ever been doxxed was by an angry ex-boyfriend. So, yeah.
What do you think this fixation is on boob size? I mean, we're two women built very differently, but I mean, it seems like such a stupid thing to get hung up on. So tell me about it from the other side of Victoria's Secrets. What's going on here?
I wish I knew. And because it's like, I've been very fortunate that I have a lot of guys that I've dated. They're like, oh man, I love your boobs. They're perfect 10s. I'm like, thanks. But I mean, it could be, this could be one of those effects that we talk about from seeing pop culture of very well endowed women, that men are conditioned to like larger boobs because that's what they see. It could just be one of those things that happens. I always get excited when I see a character drawn that isn't giant chest, but it doesn't offend me when I see it. It doesn't take away, like, Power Girl's big boobs don't bother me at all. I like her boob window. What can I say?
I always loved the old Justice Society comic. With Cyclone and Power Girl, because you had sort of the boyish figure, and I like it when they draw Supergirl smaller as well, because her name is Supergirl. I think she should be more waif-like, the Michael Turner sort of long body and girlish face, rest in peace. But it's so funny to me that solves the problem. Right? Yeah. You have multiple body types in something, the way pretty much every fighting game on the planet does it. You have the different body types. To me, that should be the end of it, but it seems like I'm naive there.
Yeah, I know. So, no, I'm with you, because it's like I see equal representation in comics and video games for women's body types. Okay, maybe we can have some different skin shades going on, but take Tekken. Is it Tekken? God, I'm so bad with fighting games. What's the one with the really big boobed girl, and she's got like the chain whip, and then there's a girl.
Soul Calibur.
Soul Calibur. Thank you.
I had that cosplay.
Sorry. Yeah. So Soul Calibur, I absolutely loved playing. This is obviously years ago, because so many women's sizes were represented. You had big Amazon with giant boobs and tiny little waif girls, and maybe the little lowly stereotype. But it was great, because and that's the thing with video games. If I don't get to create my character, like in Mass Effect, I always pick one that I identify with, and it's awesome. And I think we spend a little bit too much time fixating on what Ivy's wearing versus how cool she is, because she's this giant badass Amazon kicking ass. So I don't know. I'm kind of with you that, like, and again, that's why I've been told I'm not a good feminist, because I allow these things to happen in media, and I'm like, there's other things I'd rather be fighting against, like my pay rate.
Or, acid getting thrown in women's faces.
Oh,
or
yeah,
women being thrown in jail for shaking a man's hand. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you want to, like, I guess, and to me, this is one of the issues I have having worked on the more traditional side of journalism, is that I see what happens in the world around us. I'm very intimately aware with Malala's story.
Yeah.
I'm constantly reading and in near tears about what's happening in Syria right now, what's going on with the Yazidi women. And I look at that, and I know it's apples and oranges. I get it. I'm not saying someone else's tragedy over trumps your own personal one, but when I see women in these countries overcoming these honest to God, like, trials and having to sacrifice everything about their lives just to get to a safe place. And we're sitting here bitching about how someone's drawn. I'm kind of like, we are really privileged. We're very privileged to be able to have that conversation. And I think I wish more people, and I've been told this by various people in nerd culture. They're like I've had people like, I'll post news links and like, I don't even care. Like, why do you read that? Like, that's not important to us on a day to day. And I'm like, but it is. I'm like, the more you know about the world, I think the better you're going to be able to speak about the world, and you can use those other people's problems to understand your life better. And maybe it does take us learning like, hey, you know what? Things aren't perfect, but we have it pretty good. And to just sometimes like, I'm not, again, I'm sorry if this comes across as diminishing anyone's personal issues and trauma, but someone always is going to have it worse. And it takes you looking at yourself and putting yourself into that perspective of like, how much does this really matter to me? And am I fighting the right fight? Because there are real issues, even here in the U.S., that women are facing that I think are being overlooked because we're too busy arguing about, someone's outfit in a video game.
Yeah. Oh, some of the stuff coming out of Black Lives Matter has been chilling. You know, with the experience of Black women in the United States. Even here in Canada, we have our missing and murdered Aboriginal women issue, which is, I mean, thousands of women the system just didn't bother following up on. Mm-hmm. And those are the things. But I mean, comics is always on the forefront of tackling those issues from a distance. So why wouldn't we inform ourselves so we can understand the story?
Yeah. It's like, and so if all you as a pop culture fan is getting your news and ideas from comic books and Jon Stewart, who is no longer there, and that terrifies me in itself, it makes me very concerned about this generation and going forward, because again, I'm deeply entrenched in the political world. I love politics. I'm watching the circus, and I'm, every year everyone's like, oh, I'm so afraid, but I'm like, it actually disturbs me that Trump is so high in the polls, because that's what most of America is agreeing with. And that says something very broken about our country. And the only other generation that has the ability to vote and make change is this generation, are these pop culture nerds who aren't reading the news, who aren't going to get their stories from Jon Stewart, who aren't going to rally people to go forth and actually vote, so we don't get some crazy misogynistic, racist billionaire in office. And I'm honestly afraid that if people aren't being fed this news, they're not going to go look for it themselves.
It's true. We could talk about this all day. Yeah. I'm going to call time. We may have to do a round 2, because I'm pretty sure you're going to get a lot of love from this. We've been talking to Meredith Placko, host of Marvel Movie News. Check her out on the Popcorn Talk Network. She's also a contributor for Geek.com. Please, guys, if you like what you see, support her stuff. That's why we're doing it. We're trying to give people different voices to become informed in geeky stuff, because you don't have to constantly go to the big sites that rank high on Google. You can do different things. Use your powers for good, geeks. Use your powers for good. Thanks very much, Meredith, for your time.
Thank you so much, Liana.